India is a country that is known for its strong-willed culture of education. Families in India believe that education is one of the most important things to young people and that it must be taken seriously to have a good future. This, however, is quite hypocritical, as India's education system is sometimes referred as one of the world's worst education systems. Scholars like Rajkumar Dunghan and Jathala Tilak, both who have years of experience in the field of education, critique the Indian education system but fail to point out the effects that it has on students. This raises the question, how does the Indian education system negatively affect students? India is currently the second highest populated country in the world. In 2018, around 1.03 billion people of its population were literate, while over 346 million people were not. Of the literate, only 40% of the people completed secondary schooling. This is a prominent indicator that something is not working with the current education system. As India continues to follow this system, it is clear that there is an inefficiency in schooling, conformity to toxic norms, and a high resulting student suicide rate. India must take immediate measures to rework and overhaul its education system. Much of India's education system is inadequate due to the negligence of learning and prioritization of money. Education is not a business, it is a right, and the system needs to change to value the students the most. Jathala Tilak, a former vice-chancellor of the National University of Education Planning and Administration in New Delhi, claims that there is a visible increase in private schools in India. The increase of private schools comes from the upcoming schools choosing private over public in hopes of gaining profits. Research from Jyotsna Jha, the lead analyst at the Center of Budget and Policy Research, supports Tiak's claim by assessing that the percentage of private schools has risen dramatically. In the past 20 years alone, the percentage of private schools has risen 34.7% at the primary level, 18.6% at the secondary level, and 47% for undergraduates and above. Rajkumar Dunghan, a scholar in South Asian education, builds off Tiak's and Jha's claims by addressing that most of these private schools lack the qualified teachers that have the training required to teach students. This leaves students taught by inadequate teaching methods that they learn little from. One study showed that 60% of fifth graders enrolled in private schools were unable to complete a simple division problem. India's education system is switching its standards to what Tiak calls the profit-motivated sector, a system that prioritizes monetary gain over its original purpose in education and teaching. The lack of informed teachers creates an environment in schools where students learn and conform to certain perspectives, since teachers are not trained enough to effectively prevent and discourage destructive behavior. When one student learns and adopts a negative behavior, it is likely that other peers will embrace the same viewpoint. Kathy Doe, who has a PhD in psychology, and her colleagues study when and why adolescents conform. They mentioned that early adolescents are more susceptible to both antisocial and pro-social influence. These findings further advance the argument that the severity of culture in schools. The formerly mentioned Raj Dunghan furthers this by stating schools have sexual violence and gender-based discrimination. Early adolescents are more prone to adopting these behaviors, and as they age, it becomes more difficult to change their pre-existing attitudes. In 2019, almost 5,000 people under the age of 18 were raped in India. The crime numbers are heavily influenced by the fact that people in India grow up and normalize such behaviors while in school. Isha Nawani, a professor of social studies, claims that one could identify the college of a group of students belongs to based solely on their attire, body language, and actions. Through this, donor research and associates research concluded that adolescents would stand firm in their attitudes while being most influenced by their peers as they grow older. India's education system has a toxic culture loop that thrives as more susceptible young students experience negative behaviors that shape their attitudes, which then become more set in stone as they grow older. India currently reports the highest number of suicide deaths in the world. Suicide is the leading cause of death when compared to other causes of death in the same age range. Every year, there's an increase in adolescent suicide deaths during the months of June and July, when schools release exam results. The education system is to be blamed for a large portion of adolescent suicides. Lakshmi Vijayakumar, a member of the World Health Organization International Network for Suicide Research and Prevention, and her colleagues examined suicide in India. They found that higher completed education helped prevent suicidal thoughts. Most Indians conform to the high educational standards set by their culture. The Indian Express, an Indian-based media news company, figured that the dream of every Indian graduate is to get a job in the IT industry. And to get into such industry, students need a high education. When considering the findings of Vijayakumar and her team along with the Indian Express's statement, it can be concluded that when students fail to receive sufficient marks that they need on their exams in order to pursue higher ambitions, they are more likely to commit suicide. This is supported by an event in 2019 when incorrectly scored exams were sent out to students. A total of 19 students ended up taking their lives upon receiving the inaccurate low-scored exam results. The system needs to change to prevent situations like this from happening again. Despite the evidence of a flawed education system in need of repair, arguments are still being made that favor the way it currently is. One of the main topics that favor the current education system is India's high output of educated immigrants. In a recent article from the British Broadcasting Corporation, journalists Nikhil Amadar and Aparni Alluri pushed the idea that Indians currently dominate the top of Silicon Valley. While it is true that Silicon Valley and some of its largest, most influential companies in the world are led by Indian CEOs, this does not translate to the generalization, Indians are smart. Indian immigrants are undoubtedly smart, but this does not apply to all Indians. This argument disproportionately represents the top 0.5% of brilliant students and CEOs who are able to travel abroad due to scholarships or pre-existing wealth. In actuality, much of India is poor and unable to travel, which results in the low existing population of Indian immigrants in America. Likewise, the students in the top 0.5% received the best schooling available in India, which allowed them to achieve their academic excellence. One of the solutions to the education system would be more funding. The Indian government severely underfunds its education system despite its size. In 2019, India spent $88 billion on schools with over 131 million enrolled students. This is in stark contrast to the United States funding of over 762 billion for its 76.8 million students. Esther Dulfo, a Nobel Prize holder in economic sciences, explains that these studies showed that Indian teachers are more motivated and responsive to financial incentives. Teachers would be more motivated to teach and would have the monetary means to receive the qualified training to do so, which would ultimately lead to better taught students and higher overall school quality. However, this solution is limited as the government could disregard requests for funding due to politics or corruption. Additionally, the funding does not address the student suicide rates, which then brings me to the next solution, exam retakes. Vijay Kumar is the founder of Sneha, an organization aimed at preventing suicide in India. In the organization, she greatly advocates for the implementation of students to retake tests. The retakes would allow students to gain higher results and to be in control of their scores. The most major of implications would be the reduction in student suicide count. The system has already shown its benefits in its 50% suicide reduction rate in a single state, Tamil Nadu, when it was tested. When applied to the entire country, there could be significant results. Nonetheless, the solution is limited as it will not completely eliminate student suicides. Despite that, when put in tandem, more funding and exam retakes have the potential to completely change and heal the Indian education system.
Okay, Ethan, thank you. The first of two questions. The first one, what information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate in your research, and how did you go about trying to find?
So, the nature of my topic was pretty broad, as it directly attacks the Indian education system as a whole. So I wasn't able to find direct claims attacking the Indian education system, so I had to find small stuff, starting from news articles such as the Indian Express, and then seeing examples of what happened, such as an incident where an engineering student committed suicide after creating a 19-minute video on criticizing the Indian education system. And I worked from that and used key search terms such as education, India, and suicide in a database such as JSTOR before coming up with peer-reviewed articles such as Rajkumar Dhanhana, who, instead of just focusing on India, combined and compared India and Nepal's education system, finding that India is progressively worse than Nepal.
Okay. All right, thank you. Second question. How does your conclusion respond to any of the other research or sources that you examined?
So my conclusions, or at least the exam retakes, is almost directly taken from Dr. Vijay Kumar and her colleagues. And in an article that they wrote, they had listed numerous amounts of solutions to suicide in India, and one of them was the exam retakes. But this also links again back to an article from the Indian Express where Dishna Wani addressed topics and incidents in schools, as she was formerly a teacher. And these incidents such as teachers sexually harassing or raping students, and like physically abusing them and torturing them as teaching methods. But it directly responds to that, as the exam retakes would help prevent suicide, but it also doesn't address the fact that it won't stop the type of abuse that happens in schools. So while my conclusion does connect to it somehow, it doesn't fully address the education system as a whole.
Okay. All right, Ethan, thank you.